draft. But what you have basically is a standard Department of Games and Inland Fisheries proposed agreement for the board to consider. Mr. Larry Hart is here this evening with the Department of Games and Inland Fisheries to address any questions or comments that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Fincham, and thank you, Mr. Hart, for being here. Is there anything you'd like to say before, or are you just going to wait for questions?
No, simply I'll make myself available for any questions you might have.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Board members at this time have any questions of Mr. Fincham or Mr. Hart? Questions? No questions?
Well, I've got, you know, I just attended the General Assembly, the Ag hearings, the Senate Ag hearings, and they had a paddling bill that went down in defeat in the Ag subcommittee.
Okay.
over paddling in waterways and the actual who owns under the water in a lot of different areas. And we had this discussion a year and a half with you about who owned under the water and still traversing around fallen trees and those property owners' rights. And after listening to a group of 13 senators actually talk about this and some of the issues they'd all encountered, I guess I still have an issue with we're putting a landing in two different places. We don't own any of the property between point A and point B, and haven't spent a lot of time on that part of the river knowing how hard it is to actually traverse it with all the fallen trees. On top of the fact that you all were in a hurry to have this done 13 months ago and we're still not any closer, you still want to move forward?
Yes, sir, we do want to move forward, yes.
Okay.
I'm really a binary guy. I like that. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. So we're going to move forward with the agreement. Is there a motion to do so or not?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we approve the agreement as presented.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Akers and seconded by Mr. Black. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
I vote nay as well. Mr. Taylor, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Black, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Underwood?
Aye.
Mr. Akers?
Aye.
Mr. Seeley?
Nay.
And I also vote nay. The motion carries 4-2. So we're going to move forward. Next agenda item is agenda item number 6. First reading of the proposed amendment for Chapter 56, hunting to add coyotes, feral hogs to the exceptions prohibited for rifles larger than 22. Mr. Parton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As the board is well aware, at the last meeting, the board voted to keep the prohibition against hunting with rifles larger than 22 calibers in place. However, there is an exception in the current ordinance that allows rifles larger than 22 calibers to be used for groundhogs. At the end of the last discussion, Vice Chairman Seeley asked that we consider adding coyotes and feral hogs to the list of exceptions for the larger caliber rifles. So you have in your packet an ordinance that would accomplish that. In addition to adding coyotes and feral hogs to the list of exceptions, there is a change of language in the new ordinance that I wanted to call your attention to, and it has to do with limitations on when you can use a rifle larger than 22 caliber under the identified exceptions. The current ordinance says you can use a rifle on groundhogs except during the general open season for hunting game animals with firearms. Under the proposed new ordinance, you can use a rifle on groundhogs, coyotes, and feral hogs outside the general firearms deer season. So we're replacing the term game animals with the term deer season. The reason for that change is we consulted with Game and Inland Fisheries, and using the term game animals places fairly broad restrictions on the time that hunters could use a rifle for groundhogs, coyotes, and feral hogs. the term game animals, according to Game and Inland Fisheries, encompasses many different animals with many different seasons. You've got deer season, bear season, squirrel season, rabbit season, fox season. Some of these overlap, some of them don't. And so if you use the term game animals, you may be restricting hunters more than you really intended to. We're using a rifle against, again, groundhogs, coyotes, and feral hogs. One example that the Game and Inland Fisheries cited is you've got squirrel season, believe it or not, in June. June 7th through June 21st, as a matter of fact. So again, we surmise that given those definitions and the restrictions in place, that language, the game animals language, may be more restrictive than what the board intended. If not, we'll need to change that language. That's why we included it to, or we changed it rather to say deer season, firearms deer season. So the bottom line is the new ordinance would allow the use of rifles larger than .22 caliber for coyotes and feral hogs, in addition to groundhogs, which is already permitted. It would make it clear that the only time these animals can't be hunted with rifles larger than .22 caliber is during general firearms deer season. Finally, with regard to timing, if the board does want to consider these changes, remember you need to do it in advance of May 1st when the annual Game and Inland Fisheries publication comes out with the local zoning laws. So you need to direct hunting laws, rather, you need to direct staff by no later than March 11th to move forward with the public hearing. We'd have the public hearing at the April 8th meeting, and you would need to act on it then. That's the presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Parton. Any questions? Yeah, we really only have this one shot to see if we can do it in March, if that's the desire of the board. So if that's a desire of the board, we'll move ahead and put it advertised for public hearing. Any ideas? Is that yes? No?
I'll make it easy. I'll make a motion that we go to public hearing to amend the state code for hunting for the purpose of larger than a .22 caliber for feral hogs and for coyotes.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Seeley, seconded by Mr. Black, to move agenda item 6 to public hearing. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
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 Mr. Taylor, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Black?
Aye.
Mr. Underwood?
Nay.
Mr. Akers?
Nay.
Mr. Seeley?
Aye.
And I vote aye. The motion carries 4-2. So we'll have that on public hearing.
Has to be March 11th.
March 11th, right. That's the only, we're going to move that to the March 11th public hearing. Mr. Fincham, I guess you have item 7, which is the continued ordinance or first reading for the property manager residence issue. Oh, I should have added snakes to the
Mr. Chairman, members of the board,
Mosher said it was illegal.
we are back once again to discuss the text amendments related to the property manager's residence with a new suggestion to perhaps break the deadlock on the suggested conditions as it relates to the property manager's residence. Previous discussions with the board about the standards for the property manager's residence, there were 5 or so suggested conditions that I think the board as a whole felt generally comfortable with. The board had discussed some options such as the property being on the National Register, limitations on structures, etc., but there really was no consensus that I could tell from the board going forward on those issues. What I have suggested tonight is that perhaps instead of condition 7 or 8 that we perhaps simplify this. This type of permit arguably should be very limited in terms of applications coming to the board, okay? And the thinking is, if you can subdivide your property, you ought to subdivide your property before you come to the board and request one of these special exception permits. So what I have suggested is that we add a very simple condition that we state that the property cannot be subdivided or is not subdividable. There are really limited situations under which that might occur. It does not meet the zoning regulations to allow a subdivision. It does not meet the subdivision ordinance requirements. Maybe there's a minimum frontage requirement or something like that that they cannot meet, and therefore it does not qualify for subdivision. Or there is some kind of deed restriction on the property, such as a conservation easement that actually precludes the subdivision of the property. So under very narrow circumstances, would an applicant actually be coming to the Board of Supervisors requesting one of these, a special exception permit under this provision of the ordinance? So if a property qualified for subdivision, you had 100 acres, you wanted to do a structure for what we call a farm manager or a property manager, if the zoning district required 10 acres as a minimum lot size, they could subdivide off to 10 acres. They do not have to come to the board for a special exception permit. So you first have to demonstrate that you cannot otherwise subdivide the property. However, if there was a situation and they met the standard that it could not be subdivided, say you have a conservation easement. I'll use that as an example because that's a fairly frequent occurrence here in the county. You have a conservation easement on your 200 acres, 500 acres, whatever the magic number is. And the terms of that conservation agreement prohibit you from subdividing a parcel off, then you can come in under and make application for a special exception permit. So that is a suggestion for a way that the board to potentially address that question.
And the by right, excuse me, Mr. Fincham, the by right ability to subdivide your property is the key factor here now, because mostly one we're allowing all the farmers that want to subdivide their property that can to put up a property manager residence, they can do it now.
Yeah, and this does not address the farm tenant structure, which
Right.
is a separate set of regulations in
Right.
the ordinance.
I hope I didn't say that, but I meant to say property manager. So by right, they can subdivide, put up a house there. They can even have that subdivision in their own name, right?
Yes, sir. There's nothing when you're subdividing property, there's nothing except for a family division.
Right, which is
that
special.
says
Right.
that you can't cut off whatever the minimum acreage requirement is and keep that parcel in your name.
Okay, so very hypothetical. If I had 100 acres farming somewhere in the county, whatever the zoning was, I could say, I'm breaking off 10 acres. I'm going to still maintain the right to that by having it in my name, but I'm going to put up a property manager's residence on that 10 acres or 1 acre or whatever it would be.
And you do not even have to call it a property manager's residence.
Okay. All right, I understand. Questions of Mr. Fincham? No questions? I think we've hit the compromise now, so, okay, do we want to move this? You have to actually develop the language that you're going to put in there, which you did. Anything else we need to move it to public hearing, or?
Just a motion from the board.
Okay, but you're satisfied? Sounds like the board members are satisfied? It's a good compromise now? Is there a motion to move it forward to public hearing?
So moved.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made by Mr. Akers, seconded by Mr. Underwood. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. That motion carries.
7A.
7A and 7B, Mr. Akers, you want to do 7A funding for the,
Yes,
Crisis Center.
it's the Rappahannock Area Rape Crisis Center, And in the past, we have put it in the budget in years past, $1,000.
Right.
I'm not sure what happened, whether they didn't request it this year, I don't know. But I just would like to see us put that money back into the budget for the current year and send them a check for $1,000. Because it was a high usage of Caroline County citizens that they certainly attended to last year, and as I say, and in January of this year. I don't know what happened to the request. It would have been last year. I mean, it would have been last year. And maybe they didn't ask for it. I don't know.
Now, I think what happened, they came and made a presentation, maybe 3 years ago, maybe 4, and we funded them.
Yes, we did.
So maybe they didn't apply again, or they didn't ask anything, so, okay.
Could we, if
Yeah,
this
we
board's
would've
agreeable, I
remembered
would
that.
like to make a motion that we do amend the budget to add $1,000 that, for this particular group.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Akers, seconded by Mr. Black, that we, I guess, reappropriate funds for the Central Rappahannock Rape Crisis Center that we previously funded. That'll clarify it. All right, discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. 7B was MME?
MME.
Who had MME? Yeah, Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. Was that Mr. Finchel?
I promise this is the last time I'll come up here tonight.
Promise is promise.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this was added to the agenda in part based upon a planning commission request from their meeting last week. I think the board's all aware of the oil and gas exploration potential in the eastern part of the county. And the General Assembly is looking at some bills now related to oil and gas exploration within the Eastern Virginia groundwater management area that we heard about this evening, and some questions about how that is going to work and concerns about groundwater effects of oil and gas exploration and potential production. There is currently what's called a Notice of Intended Regulatory Action that has been published in the Virginia Register, and the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy Resources is accepting comments from citizens, citizen groups, local governments related to that issue. King George is sending comments related to studying the oil and gas exploration issue. It is not a request to prohibit oil and gas exploration. It's simply going on record supporting areas that the localities or other interested citizens believe DMME should look at in terms of developing the regulations. The Planning Commission and I had asked or suggested that we bring this to the board's attention to see if the board also wanted to go on record in submitting comments to DMME along the lines of the King George comments. If you remember, we also had discussed previously what is that line between local government regulatory authority and the state regulatory authority. That's one of the issues that is suggested that be clarified during this process, just exactly where that line is. Again, the King George comments, and if the board is interested, it's neither in favor of nor in opposition to oil and gas exploration. It would simply be areas that we think are ripe for consideration in developing the regulations. And if the board is interested, then we can get the comments together for submission tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the key, is the comments are due tomorrow. We've been asking Mr. Fincham about ways localities could affect this, and it's pretty much like the biosolids. We had local control over biosolids, and then the state took it over. I think in this case, we still want some sort of local input. We've got zoning regulations, but the county's, 90% of the county's residents are on well water. And anything that would affect that well water is going to be an issue in the county. So I think at least that's one of the comments we want to have in there, is how it affects well water, how they control it. There's all sorts of different ways they can explore this stuff out. I think King George approved this, or these are their comments. Go ahead.
Yes, this was their draft comments. I believe Ms. Cosby received the last set of comments from the county attorney this afternoon. Unfortunately, the reception here in the auditorium did not allow me to receive her email with any updates.
Okay. Does the board wish to have comments? Have Mr. Fincham add comments that he has and what others? This is a case where we're ahead of the curve. We might as well try to get as much as we can in. So a motion to that effect would be in order, please.
If we can make it clear that we are neither in favor of nor in opposition to the issue, that we simply think that there are areas that should be evaluated as part of regulatory review.
Okay. Mr. Seeley has a comment?
Actually, I sat through the public hearing or the public testimony at the General Assembly last week on this topic, and they were not very precise in the language about how long DMME actually has to produce what they consider to be regulations. There was a push in the Senate initially to give them as long as they wanted, and I think that's how it ended up. But I know that there are folks interested in drilling that want to proceed in the next 18 months, so they didn't want the regulations to take longer than the time frame for the drilling to start. I don't have a problem with comments, but there are a number of contracts signed in my district. There are a number of folks that are looking forward to this, and I think that one of the things I don't want to inhibit, and I think needs to be said, is that one of the alternative processes is the General Assembly is looking at getting rid of machine tool tax, which would be the most advantageous avenue for us in this process. So if we're going to send comments, one of the things I don't want to do is have a shot in the foot with having the machine tool tax actually stripped away from us, and then we end up with mining with absolutely nothing else left for us to actually benefit from. So I just want to be cautious in what we send, in that sometimes the message we send is, we agree with you and whatever else you want to do. And what I heard loud and clear down there was, people didn't like the sound of pumps. They didn't like the sound. They didn't like the thought of a pipeline. But if you find gas and oil, one of our biggest revenue sources would be all of those ancillary things that actually go along with it that the mining companies don't have a problem paying. So I'd just like to be mindful that as we go forward with this, the message needs to be sent that we don't want to see the machine tool tax be stripped away from us as we agree to this, because then the state makes the revenue off of this, and they take it away from us, and they say, oh, we want to replace it, but we don't know how, so you get nothing. I mean, those on the board that have been here since the car tax went away, the car tax went away was the good news. The bad news is that everybody's still paying it, as we've heard from a lot of folks, because they forced the localities to raise the rate so high because they fixed the rate the state pays us. So this is a complicated situation in that they want us to support DMME, but on the other side of the equation, they want to strip away what happens. That was my takeaway from listening to about 2 hours of this.
And I think we can say that we aren't supporting DMME. We are simply supporting the evaluation of
Of the process
of the
outlining.
process, of the analysis, the impact or potential impacts to groundwater, water supply, disclosure. I think we can word it so we aren't supporting necessarily DMME. We're simply supporting a review of the regulations and looking at these issues.
And we're saying we want some local authority, but Mr. Seeley's point is very valid. Whether we're in favor or not, we do wish that machinery and tools tax would remain in this project.
I'm not even sure, Mr. Chairman, that the two need to be combined. To me, they should be separate. We should be against eliminating machinery and tools tax regardless of what they do with the other process. And so we should have been, we should have been loud down there early on in saying we are opposed to the removal of machinery and tools tax.
I just
No,
watched
understand.
how they combined them.
That was just in this one process that
No,
we're
I
talking about.
understand, but I think we ought to say
Yeah.
that up front, and that should be a separate letter to our delegates and state senators saying, we would hope you would not vote to take that source of revenue from the county at this time.
I just watched,
And
it was
that would
interesting
be
to me
a
how they combined,
Yeah.
all of this sort of came together at one place. So, it's like they're using one to support the other and vice versa.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, but I just think it needs to be, we need to be loud and clear
Well,
about
the
that. VACO is
Right.
certainly being loud and clear, but I think we as a county, and I'm sure that Region 7 is being loud and clear. I believe that it is probably in the Region 7's legislative program, but I think the county should be very vocal with that as well.
Okay, and we could let Mr. James know, because he's been
Yeah.
liaison too, to kind of highlight that. Right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Fincham. We basically directed him via the board. Mr. Cullen? Agenda item 8 is capital projects report.
Basically information. I've included a capital projects report for your review, along with the Fredericksburg Regional Transit ridership report, 2 or 3 pages in there of that. And then the calendar. And the only thing I would update you is we've had several conference calls today regarding the weather. It does look like we're in for a pretty significant heavy, wet snow. Dominion Power is very concerned about this snowfall. Once it exceeds 4 inches of accumulation due to the weight of the wet snow, it's going to be different than anything we've had this year. And so we're still in the potential for up to 10 inches. It moves around. It may change again tomorrow. And so we are monitoring. We've had a meeting with all the key staff today to determine whether, if we should have power outages, whether we'll open the shelter and do the things that we need to do for people that are cold or people that have electricity needs if electricity goes out and they need medical devices to run and that type of thing. So just Thursday, I would advise staying off the road Wednesday night and Thursday.
Do all the board members get the update from Dominion Power? We're all on that? Okay. So we'll use that. We also have County Alert. We're probably going to open late Thursday, if at all, based on what happens, so we'll just know ahead of time. The phones will still be working. If anybody calls in, they'll return the messages. Mr. Colley will be working from home, or Mr. Parton. So you're going to come in? Okay, Mr. Parton's going to come in. All right.
Don't let them do that to you.
Okay, that was it?
Yes, sir.
That was it for Mr. Colley. All right, closing board comments. Mr. Taylor.
I have none.
Mr. Black?
Just a quick reminder, constituent meeting Thursday, February 20th, with Congressman Rob Whitman, Delegate Buddy Fowler, and myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Underwood?
No comments, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Akers?
No, sir.
Mr. Seeley?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't think I have any, but I have something February 20th. All right.
I will move that the board convene in closed meeting pursuant to consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff exempt under Section 2.2-311A7 of the Code of Virginia regarding specific legal matters requiring legal advice regarding unpaid water availability fees from Ladysmith Water Company, and the prospective business expansion of 2.23711A5 of the Code of Virginia to provide status updates to the board on several potential businesses that are considering relocating in the county and about which no previous public announcement has been made.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Seeley, seconded by Mr. Black. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The board will be in closed meeting in about 5 minutes. All right. Motion to come out of closed meeting? So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. Akers to come out of closed meeting. Mr. Taylor, do you certify that only those things we entered closed meeting for were discussed?
I so certify.
Mr. Black, do you certify?
I so certify.
Mr. Underwood, do you certify?
I so certify.
Mr. Akers?
Yes, sir, I so certify.
Mr. Seeley?
I so certify.
And I so certify. We are now out of closed meeting. Mr. Cully, we had no actions from our closed meeting.
That's correct, no action.
Motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Seeley,
Aye.
seconded by Mr. Akers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.